Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, frequent flyers, wherever you're dialing in from today. Thank you for being here with us live. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Jill Meyers on this episode of The Lounge. What we're going to be talking about today is what we do when unexpected changes come our way, especially when it comes to our career, something a lot of us hold very dear. And what do? Well, we think May the 4th be with me because today is May 4th. So May the 4th be with you as you join us live to talk about unexpected pivots. Jill Meyers calls herself a driver of good things, and she is also the 2022 Katharine Wright Trophy Award recipient. So what better person to talk about change and navigating difficult career paths than this wonderful woman sitting here with me today. Jill, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for having me on. I'm really excited about this conversation today.
Thank you. Now, Jill and I met through LinkedIn, actually. And I had put up a post from Women in Aviation. I was at the event in February, and I had a series of different photos with different women that I've really connected with in the industry. And I think you commented and said, all my favorite people. So you must be, good people too. And then we started messaging each other, and here we are. I love it.
It's great. LinkedIn has been such a huge source of happiness for me, really. Found some jobs through LinkedIn, but have met just incredible people like yourself. And I'm so happy to be connected.
Thank you. Yeah, and same here. And I think what I would really encourage everyone who's watching this to do, if you're not already on LinkedIn and watching us live here, please go and check it out. It is a platform I've definitely used for the last 13 plus years to great extent, and I have met amazing people, made connections. It's led to jobs, right? And it's just led to some really great friendships as well. And we've got Amrita Rose and Jessica Roden live with us, saying that they're excited to hear this, and two of their favorite people. And we love you guys too. Thank you for being here with us live.
Thank you.
See the power of LinkedIn and the power of networking in action.
Definitely.
So, Jill, one of the topics, I always ask my guests what topic would they like to talk about, and obviously my business is all about change and pivot point. And you said you wanted to talk about how to handle unexpected change and pivots, especially when it comes to your career and things going off plan. So I'd love to hear from you, why was this such an important topic for you? And what are some of those key pivots you've been through?
Happy to describe that. So a little bit of my background, which will help explain why my pivots have been particularly challenging for me. I was introduced to aviation, if you will, when I was 12. I grew up early years in Philadelphia, and my dad had a really good friend north of Boston who was an inventor and a scientist and a brilliant and wonderful man who had his own airplane, the Cessna 140 tail dragger. And when I was 12, we went up there every year for a few days. And when I was up there, when I was 12, he one day said, I'd like to take you out in the airplane while you're here and also go sailing. So we did both, and I absolutely hated the sailing. And, we went up in his plane, over the coast, over the Atlantic for an hour. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is it. Like, this is what I want to do with my life. But I didn't really know what exactly I wanted to do.
Okay.
So very long story short, had a full scholarship for college, started college, quit, joined the Air Force. Oh, and by the way, I got my pilot's license. I guess I skipped the big part. So I started, I did some research, no internet back then because I'm older than I look. And I'm like, okay, you need to be 17 to get a pilot's license. So literally the day I turned 17, I rode my bike to the local airport, which was Scottsdale Municipal Airport, which was super tiny back then in Arizona, and started taking flying lessons. So I flew super early in the morning or, nights and weekends during high school, and got my license December of my senior year. So then, graduated, got a full scholarship and just thought, this isn't aviation and I don't know what to do. And what's interesting is, I do public speaking, and in my keynote speech, I use a theme that I think is really relevant also to what we're talking about. And that theme is a quote from Sally Ride. So Sally Ride once said, "You can't be what you can't see." And I'm a perfect example of that. So here I was, 17 years old, with high school counselors and colleges tossing scholarships at me left and right. And my flight instructor, who I'm hilariously still in contact with, he looked me up 30 years later and said, "I think this is you." Wonderful man who's been flying. He just retired from American Airlines. But, no one ever sat down and said, hey, Jill, you have a pilot's license. Do you want to become a pilot? Because there were no women in my world. There were no women at the airport, no other female students, no one in the tower, like nobody.
Right.
So it never crossed my mind that I could be a female professional pilot. So anyway, then I decided to join the Air Force because I was like, all right, I really want to be around airplanes. I want to get the heck out of the house. I'd like to travel and eventually go back to college, and I'm pretty sure they'll pay for that. So I ended up joining the Air Force. I walked into the recruiter's office with my pilot's license in my hand, and they went, oh, yeah, but you're a girl, and we don't do that, which they didn't at the time. This is in the 70s. They were just starting to let women fly, but not anyone coming in from outside the military. So I joined anyway and, had a really great career, and then got my aerospace engineering degree while I was in. But, all that to say that I had a lot of instances in my long career, 40 something years now, where I was told, no, you can't do that because you're a girl. And that was the first time. But, the way I've resolved most of my, no, you can't do that because you're a girl, is just to figure out, what's next. What can I do instead? So for example, when they said, no, you can't fly, my thought process was, well, what's really important to me? It's being around airplanes. So if I join the Air Force, I'll be around airplanes. So I did. Yeah. And then to progress to my next, one of my most significant and difficult pivots, really, really difficult pivots, was I loved being in the Air Force. I loved it more than anything. Never met anyone in uniform in my life, but fell in love with it once I got in. And I started taking night classes as soon as I got to my first operational base. And University of Maryland, I don't know if they still do, but University of Maryland had campuses at every single Air Force base in the world.
Okay.
So my first assignment was in Omaha, Nebraska. My second was in Germany, and I was taking classes, calculus, physics, whatever, still with sort of no direction. So then the first space shuttle went up in 1981. I was like, aha, astronaut. I want to be an astronaut. So I'm plugging along, taking one class at a time, because I had a very intense 24-hour on-call job when I was in Europe working for NATO. And the education office called me in one day and said, you're killing us. You're never going to finish your degree. Why don't you apply to this program? You're not going to get in, Jill, but why don't you apply to this program? They said, you're too young. You don't have enough rank, but you ought to try. So I ended up getting accepted first time to a program where they send you to college full time to finish your degree, but you stay active duty and get paid. It's really
wow.
So they picked what school I went to. I told them what degree I wanted. They picked the school. So I went to University of Texas in Austin at the main campus, the best thing ever. Got my degree in astronautical engineering. And then I went to officers training school. So when I first joined the Air Force, I was enlisted because I didn't have a degree. Got my degree, a killer 3 years, no breaks every summer. Air Force wouldn't let me have any fun time. Got my degree. I show up at Officers Training School, OTS, in San Antonio, Texas. And the squadrons of trainees, it's a 12-week, really intense, horrible program. And the squadrons were squadrons of 40, what they call officer trainees, OTs. So lo and behold, I was assigned to a squadron with me and 39 guys.
Of course.
It wasn't necessarily unexpected, right? And I'd been the only female in a lot of my engineering classes at UT. And I thought, well, this is great because I'm prior military. I had at that time 6 years enlisted, and I knew what I was doing. So I really had no issues the first 10 of the 12 weeks, did really well. And then I fell running the 1.5 miles for time during the physical fitness test. I ended up later finding out I actually ripped all the muscles off my hip bone, but didn't know it at the time. Oh. But when you get hurt, you just wince and keep going, right? Yeah, so I keep trudging along. And then 3 days later, the base commander called me in his office. And it's 2 weeks before graduation, mind you, called me in his office and he said, we're disenrolling you, which was a new word for me. I was like, what do you mean you're disenrolling me? He's like, well, you failed here, so you're leaving. I said, well, I'm pretty sure the reg says you have to have 3 failures, and I failed the run test, and when I'm not injured, I'll take it again. He's like, no, you failed 3 things, and you're leaving, which was not true. So they actually falsified my records in order to remove me from OTS, so I wouldn't be the only skirt in the graduation parade, which I could never prove. So that was my first hellacious pivot, because I wanted to be a career Air Force. I wanted to stay in 20, 30 years. And they didn't kick me out of the military, but they demoted me to the rank I held before I started at UT. So they demoted me to a rank I held 3 years prior.
Wow.
Made me stay enlisted. And the rules in the Air Force are, most military branches, if you don't have a degree, you cannot be an officer. And if you're not an officer, you can't hold certain jobs. So
Right.
the Air Force had just paid a lot of money and invested time in me to get my engineering degree, and then said, well, you really can't be an engineer now because enlisted people can't be engineers.
Right.
So I was, needless to say, beside myself. I was actually suicidal because I thought, this was my dream. I've worked so hard for this. They're pulling it out from under me and lying about it, even better. Turned out there was a huge, my boss, I got reassigned, to a new assignment as a sergeant. Had a really good job, by the way, in Colorado Springs, and thought about, staying in, but I just really didn't want to do what I was doing. And somehow someone found out about what happened. So the base JAG office got involved. It was a huge investigation, and they called me back about 3 months, 4 months later and said, well, we did all the research and you were right. I said, yes, I know. And they said, well, we'd like to offer you to go back to OTS. And I said, under what conditions? Then they said, well, number one, you have to start over. It's like, okay. And I said, let me guess, the gentleman who threw me out is still in charge. And they said, yes. And I said, do I look stupid? So no. So ended up getting out, but it was a really difficult challenge for me because I didn't know what to do next,
Right.
But in what we talked about before we went live, Sarah, is a lot of times pivots turn out better than the path you get put on turns out to be better than the path you were on. And that was surely the case for me. Not that I don't still wonder what would have happened if I would have stayed in. However, I got to be an engineer. I got out, I spent another 1.5 years in, and then got out and got my first ever real, no kidding, engineering job. And it was like the most fun I've ever had. And and all along, I also thought to myself, because I really missed flying and I still do, but I said to myself at one point, if I can't fly, what can I do? Well, if I can't fly them, I can build them. I can design them.
Yeah.
And that has ended up to be, in a way, more exciting to me. And I've had a lot of pilots, professional pilots, say, oh my God, you're the one who helped build this thing I'm flying. You're like, you're a rock star. I'm like, yeah, but you're so there's a lot of esteem from a lot of pilots, especially military, when they find out, for example, I worked on the F-35. They're like, oh my God,
Wow,
you're
that's cool.
So sometimes you just have to, really do your best to figure out what that right turn in your life is going to give you. So to answer your original question, why is it important to me? It's important to me because I've been through some really difficult pivots, and I think in hindsight, it's been a better path for me. And so it's important for me to talk about it. It's important for me when I mentor young women, which I do a lot, to help them through their own unexpected pivots, which I've done before, because you just really never know what's around that corner. And you have to be really open to what might be around whatever corner you have to turn. But it's not easy. And I couldn't have done it without, my network support and stuff. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, what an incredible story. And I'm sure there are other stories out there, but especially going through the military or any male-dominated industry, 30, 40, 50 years ago, we have such extreme cases. And that's not to say these cases don't still happen today, because there are still certain people that hold worldviews and beliefs that are outdated. And I like to think of this as, imagine we were using a current computer and you're trying to operate, Windows 95 in today's world. Like, it's absurd, right? We laugh at this concept, and yet that is exactly what most of us do in some form or another in our life. We have this belief that we developed, years ago, and we've never changed it. And we refuse, we do confirmation bias to make things fit our worldview. And then when it doesn't, it's really stressful. And it creates tension and, leads on to a whole other host of things that can happen. But what advice do you give the girls that you mentor, or the young people that you mentor, when, it's like they're going down, there's a corner coming, it's a blind corner, there's nothing they can do. So how do they prepare for that?
The best way, I think, is, and can I use an example, is probably
Yes,
the
please.
better way to answer that, because I've mentored quite a few women, and I could talk about mentoring all day long. But one of the things I love about mentoring is you can have, I hosted a panel a few years ago for the International Aviation Women's Association with some amazing people talking about mentoring, and one of them, I happened to be very lucky to be friends with an astronaut, Nicole Stott, and she talked about accidental mentoring, where you have maybe a one-time event, and you don't really realize you're doing mentoring when in fact you are, because there's just so many ways to mentor people. But having long-term mentorship relationships has been very different for me and very impactful. So there's a couple of women who I have been mentoring for anywhere from 3 to 7 years.
Beautiful.
As they go through different phases. So I think the common thing, to answer your question first, the common thing I really try to instill in folks is that first I give one of my examples, and then I basically encourage them just to be really open to the possibilities, because you really don't know what path might be better for you. And it's really hard when you're in the middle of a really emotional crisis, if you will. So I'll give you one example. So there's a young woman I started mentoring. I've been a member of Women in Aviation International for, 22 years or something. And I've run 3 chapters because I move around a lot. And I was asked to take over the San Diego chapter when I moved there in late 2014. And very early in 2015, I held the first chapter meeting of the year. And this young woman in a Navy uniform came up to me. And she literally had tears in her eyes. And she said, "I want to thank you because I finally found my people." And her name's Shay. Her story was that she was an enlisted engine mechanic on H-60 Marine helicopters when I met her. She was in the Navy. But she really, really wanted to be a pilot. So, we ended up building a relationship. And as all young people, male and female, do when they join the military to be a pilot, they all want to be fighter jet pilots. They all want to fly fighters. Let's go as fast as we can, and maybe even bomb things, And very few people that I've met in the world, very few people ever think anything other than fighter jet. It's just really funny.
Yeah.
So I helped Shay find a flight instructor. She started private flight training. I helped her with her officer candidate school, as they call it in the Navy, her OCS application. I helped her get into the Navy flight school program and get commissioned as an officer. And she was on the path to become a fighter jet. And she knows I talk about her, and I'm okay saying this publicly, but she had some challenges through some of the phases of training. And she got to the point, and she would call me frequently, very upset, not know what to do. And every stage of her progression, I helped her. And then it got to a point, I guess it's been 2 years ago now. She was already 2.5 years into training, 2 years into training. And she called me one day and she said, it was on a Friday. And she said, "Okay, on Monday, I have to go see the commander of the flight school. And I'm either going to be thrown out of the Navy, or I'm going to be forced to pick a different flight platform, or I don't know what the third option is." And she was devastated. And, I had talked to her along the way about how she felt she was fitting into the fighter jet world, and it wasn't really a good fit for her. So I always say this, I'm sorry, but long story short, I am good friends with an amazing woman in the Navy who has also been mentoring Shay for a while. She, helicopter pilot, has an amazing career. And I had said to Shay starting early on, I said, there's other things you can fly that may be a better fit for you. So she ended up that Monday morning going in and saying she would like to be considered to shift over to rotorcraft.
Yeah.
So they approved it, and Shay hopped over to another base and, walked into helicopter training. And I cannot tell you how many times since, that was about 1.5 years ago, how many times she has called me and thanked me and sent me letters, because it is the perfect fit for her personality. Everything about flying, and she flies the massive, it's called the MH-60 Seahawk. She flies these massive, like the biggest gray helicopters they build, Sikorsky based. And she is in heaven and having the time of her life. Yesterday, she deployed on the USS Gerald Ford for nine months. She's gone till like November, December. Okay. And every time she has a major success, she texts me photos and videos, and her mom and I have become friends. And her mom is like, "You completely saved my daughter's career," multiple times. So, Shay's a good example of, she thought her life was over, like
Right?
I did with my Air Force experience. And where she ended up is exactly where she's supposed to be. So the
Yes.
challenge when people get into these unexpected pivot situations, especially when they're out of their control, which is a lot of the time,
Yeah.
you really just have to try to calm yourself down, which is hard, get people surrounding you to help you, and just really walk through all the options and have someone help you walk through those options. Because I know with Shay and with other folks I've helped through difficult situations, and with my own experience, is it is such a dreadfully emotional time.
Yes.
And it's all negative emotions, right? It's fear, it's anger, it's feeling like you have failed,
Right.
and you really need outside influence, I think, to help right yourself in those situations. I couldn't have ever gone through my difficult times without, people giving me guidance, and I've seen it through the women that I've been mentoring and coaching. So
Beautiful. I love that. And I'd like to offer a reframe on the negative emotion piece because
please.
negative or positive is something that we judge based on our perception, and something
Mhm.
that's negative to one person can be positive to another. So I'd rather offer people to think of it as an intense emotion, because you can have intense joy, which is also overwhelming, as well as intense grief. So as long as you learn how to regulate and come back to a neutral space, then it
Mm.
doesn't matter what judgment you place on it. It's always making those clear decisions, as you said, from that place of neutrality. Because if we're in intense joy, we might have blind spots that we don't look at, or we ignore the red flags. I mean, how many people in a dating situation or in a job situation have gone through that, right?
Yeah.
And if we have intense grief or anger, something that society tells us is bad, don't ever feel those things, then we repress it. And again, we miss red flags. So we always want to come back to that neutral space before we make our decisions.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. Love
Yeah,
that.
you're welcome. So with this then, based on the pivots you've been through and the women you've mentored, and I love the continuity of having longevity in the mentorship, because, we grow and evolve as people, and to have someone who sees where we started, that origin point, and then the different phases that we go through, we can get a lot deeper and more nuanced advice than someone that we've just met for the last month, and they've only seen this kind of one side of us so far. So I
Sure.
think that's really important for people to not like kind of mentor hop and try to have too many people. Have creating that long-term relationship is really key. So
Mhm.
what would you say your superpower is from these pivots?
Well, it's interesting. I've been asked that before, and I usually struggle to answer, but someone I've been chatting with for a long time pointed out something to me just yesterday. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I think it may actually be my superpower, and I didn't realize it until it was pointed out to me
Yeah.
yesterday. Somebody yesterday said to me, with everything you've gone through in your life, Jill, good and bad, she said, you always come from a place of joy.
Mm.
And it really shocked me. And we talked about it for quite a while. And she said, it's everything from how you phrase things when you help people, how you talk about things you've done, experiences you've had, places you've been. For example, I was back in Seattle for a few days last week. I had lived there for 8 years, a long time ago, and I live in New Mexico now and really miss the water. And I
Mm.
was showing this person, photos of I spent every possible minute sitting in front of either Puget Sound or Lake Washington to get my water fixed. And just, the quote joy that she saw in me and how emotional I was about, showing her these pictures. And she said, even when you've gone through challenges, you always have this core. And she started calling me Joyful Jill.
I love it. Alliteration is great.
But so I think that may be my secret superpower that I didn't really realize until, because she not only pointed it out, but used a lot of examples of things that I've done, and it really kind of resonated with me. So I think that's my new
Beautiful.
superpower.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. That's
Sure.
also a great reflection of, having those people around you that you can speak to, that give you that reflection, the perspective that you just don't see. I mean, we look at ourselves every single day in the mirror and we don't notice the change because it's so small and nuanced, but others that don't see us as often or have experienced us in different ways can offer a much different picture than what we currently see.
Always,
Yeah.
always. Yeah. Yeah.
So with that as well, my other question I always like to ask my guests is who's on your board of directors? Your personal board, what kind of lenses do you put on when you're in a difficult situation to be able to think, right, if I was talking to this person, how would they guide me through this?
Absolutely. Yeah. And as I said earlier, I couldn't survive without them. I would say the number one person, her name is Krista, and Krista has been a friend of mine since 2008. And we met at work.
Okay.
She's not in my industry. She was sort of in a fluke job, out of her normal realm. But Krista has been a very close friend of mine, but as importantly, I should say, equally important, she's been kind of my unofficial career coach.
Okay.
And what's amazing about Krista is, and I think it's fair to say, I have never made a job decision without running it by her first. And as we mentioned earlier, Sarah, with this, long-term mentorships, I mean, I've known her for so long and we're so comfortable with each other that she can, if she needs to, just look at me and say, "Are you out of your mind?"
Right. We all need that. We all need it.
What I love the most about Krista, and the reason she's such a help to me, is that she is by far the most intuitive and insightful person I have ever known. And she comes up, and she's brilliant. She comes up with these ideas or things to think about that I would have never thought of.
Right.
And she's really my sounding board, and has been there for me, again, for many years. One of my other board of director members, I believe you said she's on this call. So Amrita Rose is actually my cousin, my first cousin. So we've known each other a very long time. Our mothers were sisters, and she has got incredible insight as well, and has because she is not at all in my industry and is not at all in a technical field, she comes with a whole different perspective.
Yeah.
And she also understands our family dynamics. So in fact, just the other day, we had a really long chat, and I was mentioning to her, like, why do I do this? And I believe the word she used was, she said, "I think it's ancestral." And I love that, because she's like, I do that too. So she brings a whole different side of the personal coaching.
Yes.
Krista gives me a little more like of the professional coaching. And then I have a couple other really close friends, some newer friends that I've not known for that long.
Yeah.
And, the long-term relationships are great, but I also do like having people on my personal board that I've not known for that long, because they may give me a completely different, out of the blue perspective as well.
Right.
And I have a couple of friends that I've known for, I would say, 3-4 years.
Yeah.
Who are sort of my go-to people. And in fact, the two of them both live, here in Albuquerque, Santa Fe. So they're people I can sit down with in person, whereas, Amrita and Krista don't live anywhere near me. So, we don't see each other that often, but those are kind of my core people. Sorry?
Beautiful. I was just gonna say that makes a difference too, being able to sit down with someone, in person, as beautiful as the fact we can even do this, right?
Yeah.
Being able to sit down and not have the distraction of phones or anything like that, and, feel that energy, that's really, really important. I mean, people might think, "Ooh, energy's woo. We don't want to go there." You can talk to my dear friend Albert Einstein about energy and everything in this world being made up of it. If we want to go back to 7th grade science class for those logical type A's out there.
Definitely. Yeah.
And I think, like you said, the newer relationships give you a completely different perspective. They don't have the backstory. It's kind of like when you're reading a book, right? When you're watching a movie, you just get dropped into the scene, and you have to use your context and your critical thinking to figure out, like, okay, who's who, how are they related? What's going on? You don't see, in Die Hard, you don't know the character of Bruce Willis. You don't know the last 30 something years of his life and what his mom did and what this, a lot of times it's just a story, and story only holds meaning that we give to it. So if we can take that out of the equation, we come back to neutral a lot more quickly. So the newer contacts can help with that.
Definitely. Yeah. And I like to balance the guidance from them all. Try to balance the guidance, because they don't align usually, right? So you still have to take all that input and do something with it, which is sometimes the hardest part. But
right. And that goes down to the point of, it's great to have this board, right? But ultimately for you, only you know what's best,
Yeah.
right? Because everyone has their own perspective, their own flavor, and it's up to you to take the data and synthesize it, calibrate it, and then use it to realign your systems for where you're going to navigate to. Because at the end of the day, your mentor could tell you something all day long, and from their perspective, that looks like it's the right path and the best one for you in the way that they know you. But internally, you might, have the alarm bells going off going, I need to go that way. And so
Right.
it's really important to learn to listen to that. And I think, especially in male dominated industries and just in general in our society, that was really like, no, ignore all of your systems, right? Especially in the military, like you have to go to the bathroom, too bad, wait. You
Right.
have to do this, too bad, wait. So we learn to shut off our own signals from our body, drinking water, going to the bathroom. Oh, I got to do more emails, the desk warrior symptom of everything's urgent right now. And so we ignore the signals and we've just lost touch. So coming back to center and really sitting with yourself, I think one of the things you said was appreciating what you have and working with what you know. And only you know what you know, because there's a lot that can't even be put into words.
It's very true, although that's not always easy. In fact, just last week, I asked one of my two really close friends here, what her thoughts were on a career decision I was in the middle of making. And she said, it doesn't matter what I think, only you know what is right for you. And I was frustrated by that. It's like, no, I just want you to tell me what to do, which is the wrong thing, of course. It's the easy way out, right? So,
Right.
but she was very strong, and she's like, I can tell you what I wish you would do for my own personal gain, but it's not my decision. And I was like, darn it, but
Yes. And that's a really powerful thing to do as a mentor or coach as well, because ultimately that ability to be a sovereign being and to have that autonomy, that's something we all crave. And yet when we know we're out of alignment because we're doing what we think we should do, right? We're using the mind rather than the heart, and they're
Right.
not connected. They're not speaking to each other.
Mhm.
That's when we usually want to abdicate responsibility and say, hey, someone else make this decision for me. Just tell me what to do, because then we're not as disappointed if we made the wrong decision. We don't have to take ownership of it. And so the more you can practice taking ownership of the things you do and think and feel, because they're all related, then the easier it becomes with the hard decisions as well, right? We got to build up the baby muscles and all the boring accessory work before we can go do the complex movement.
Yeah, agree completely. And I'll add to that I think one of the biggest things that mentors can do, coaches, whatever, friends, is help you build up that confidence to get to that exact point.
Yes. They help you give that self-assurance, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I mean, even with my own clients, I'm not making them do anything. I'm asking questions and just shining the flashlight on an area that they maybe haven't looked at before. And then they're taking the steps and they come to their own aha realization. And I mean, think about it. When we're kids, everyone can relate to this, and your parents tell you something. What do? You go, Mom, you don't know. Dad, you don't know, right? Like whatever. Teacher tells you, but they're telling you, they're not showing you. When they show you something and you're just watching, you go, oh, wait a second, I might try that. Nobody likes to be told what to do, right? Even when we ask for it, we still don't like to be told what to do. But when we can see somebody actually living and breathing the results that we want, that's when we have the respect. That's when we say, hey, you know what? I might give that a try.
Very true. Very true. Well said.
Thank you. So Jill, I think one of the last thing, the big point that you had, which I loved, was having a plan and the flexibility to just throw it out the window if need be. And so, there's a lot of people that will be watching this who are the typical type A, like plan everything, time block, efficiency, productivity. How can they start to loosen the reins of that perceived control to be able to be more flexible and adaptable?
It's a good question, and I'll interject a quick funny story. The first time I worked for Raytheon, I was put on a career panel where I think 4 or 6 of us from different levels of our career went to a local university and spoke to a group of female engineering students, and they all had our bios sent to them in advance. And the very first question I got was someone in the back of the room raised their hand and said, "So Jill, you apparently don't know how to plan your career." from looking at your resume. It's like, excuse me. And my response was, oh, I always have a plan, but it never works out. And that's been, most of my career.
The reframe there could be, it never works out as I planned, but it works out better.
Right. And a lot of the reason is I spent, I don't know, a good 20 years being asked to go fix things that were broken. So I got pulled, rather than me, leaving a place and going to find a new job. But I would say that, I am a type A planner, absolutely. And I do always have a plan. And, as we've talked about this whole time, very often when my plan doesn't work out, what was put in front of me turned out to be a better solution. So I think that people who do really want to have a whole life plan or career plan or 5-year plan or whatever duration you're thinking of, you just have to know that there may be some exit ramps off of that plan. Either
Right.
you drive to them or you get forced off the road.
Right.
And I just think it's a matter of being flexible, which I know is really hard for especially type A people, especially in our industry. But I also feel as if, and this happened with me, is once you go through that off ramp one time, especially if it works out way better for you, you just have to go back to that point and remember that, okay, this happened to me once before, and it turned out to be a good thing. Yeah. And again, just keep your mind really open to things. I was once fortunate to be in the audience when Deborah Lee James, who at the time was the Secretary of the Air Force, was a keynote speaker. And she told her own story where the career she started out for didn't work out at all. And, someone said, why don't you join the Air Force as a civilian? She's like, what? And then she's standing there as Secretary of the Air Force, only the second female to hold the position. But she looked at this room of literally 3,000 people and said, your career can zigzag. And that's an okay thing, and it maybe be a better thing for you. And I've always remembered that, people who have a plan that they're going to do one thing for X duration of time, it may not really be the best thing for you. And you just have to trust the universe, as my best friend says, that the universe is looking out for you. Yeah. And just be open to the idea that going off the plan actually might be better for you, and just try to keep your mindset open to what that possibility might look like, and maybe proactively think about why it might be better for you. I'm a huge pro and con list person. I analyze everything probably to a fault. But really thinking hard about the idea of not being kept to or stuck on the path that you thought you were going to be on, and what the next thing around the corner may actually give you that's positive. So
I love that. Yeah, it's looking at the pro and the con of everything. Every experience, every emotion, every choice will have a limit and a serve. So the more you can really spend time in that and understand yourself better, right? Increasing your own self-awareness, that's going to make these types of experiences less painful, because you won't be clinging to something or desperately trying to avoid something. You'll learn to surrender. And I just read a really good book, The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. He also wrote The Path to the Untethered Soul. And it is absolutely fascinating to read his story, and how when he just surrendered to what life was serving him at that moment and being excellent at whatever that thing was, it took him on these paths that he could have never even fathomed.
Yeah, one more thing, if I could add to Sarah, is if you're in a position where you need to pivot, and if you have any idea of where that pivot might take you, my strongest recommendation is try to find someone who's already on that other path, that alternate path, and talk to them. It's like I did with Shay. When Shay was considering flying helicopters, I immediately called my friend, the helicopter commander, and I said, Shay needs to talk to someone who's lived and breathed this and what that life might look like for her. And, talk to someone who's living and breathing that alternate path, to just get a little bit of a feel from someone really doing it, what that might look like, and what challenges you might face, and what amazing things you might also, be able to experience. And I always recommend to my mentors to find someone to talk to, even if it's one coffee date, to really ask the hard questions of, what does your life look like in this, professional realm?
Yeah, that's wonderful advice. And also, you can use LinkedIn for this. I used to do this all the time. I'd come across people as I was, navigating and seeing comments, and I'd be like, oh, that's a really interesting job title. Or, oh, I've always wanted to work there, and I want to learn about the real culture of the company and, what it's like day to day, not just what I see. And I'd reach out to them, and, 9 times out of 10, I got a response.
Yeah.
Because all I was asking was for their personal experience, and people love to share their story. So, this is really great advice. If you think you want to go somewhere, find someone who's there and ask them about their experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So Jill, the final question before we sign off is, how do you think you best serve humanity?
That's a big question. I think I best serve humanity by helping those who are on a path that I might be able to help them on. I don't want to say those behind me, but kind of. It's been extremely important to me. I mean, I started tutoring when I was in middle school. So I was tutoring younger kids in math when I was like in 7th grade. So it's always been my natural instinct to help other people who are just going through what I just went through. And so I guess my biggest contribution is I do whatever I can. And as anyone who's listening who knows me professionally knows that I've been doing outreach and mentoring and speaking, all for no money for 20 something years, because it's so important to me to give back to the younger generation and to help them. What I believe I do most and best is to help them navigate through situations that they might face that I will probably have also gone through myself, or I know someone who did, or just my decades of experience gives me the ability to give them guidance, even if I haven't, gone through the exact thing myself. But really helping people navigate through life is, I think, what I provide to the universe.
I love that. And, I just got this image of, back in the old days when we used to fly with like 4 pilots and a flying engineer and a navigator. You're the navigator. You're sitting there next to the person flying. They're still flying. They're still in control, but you are simply, here's the map. This is what I see. And, this is how we can choose to take this route, or maybe here's an alternate. Right. And so that's a very powerful gift. So thank you for sharing that with everyone.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So Jill, where can people find you should they need a little bit of help navigating their careers, or if they have questions about the Air Force or anything in aviation and aerospace that you might be able to help them with?
I am, of course, on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. My website right now is jillrmyers.com, my middle initial R. I'm launching a new website with the name of my consulting business, which is myersairconsulting.com, but that's not up yet. So for now, jillrmyers.com or LinkedIn. I don't really use the other social media platforms professionally, except sometimes on Instagram. I'll speak at an event and someone will tag me, so I do a little bit. But I do photography on the side too, so most of my Instagram is an attempt to stay, as Instagram started in the old days.
Yes, image worthy. Yeah. And I think everyone should definitely go check out Jill's photography. It is phenomenal. There's some very cool stories on there as well of some of her experiences, and a picture speaks 1,000 words. So we don't need to use words for that. You can go and see the photos and have a beautiful story.
There's a link on my website. I think it's on the About page. There's a link to it's a photo story website, as Sarah said. It's photos and little blurbs that go along with them. Thank you, Sarah.
You're so
there's airplanes in there too. Lots of airplanes.
Lots of airplanes.
There's some airplanes in
there. All right, Jill. Well, thank you so much. As always, this has been a blast. I've really enjoyed having you on the episode today. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Well, thank you so much again for reaching out and inviting me, Sarah. And thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you. We'll see you guys soon.